At first appearance, St Osyth in Essex is like many other villages in the area, quiet and scenic with many historical buildings. But what few people know is in 1582, a witch hunt fever gripped the town and 14 women were wrongfully put on trial for witchcraft. Tonight we'll be investigating the Cage, the prison in which these women spent the last of their days in appalling conditions. Many previous owners of the house and paranormal teams who have stepped foot inside over the years claim to have experienced paranormal activity. The witches, the prisoners and even the jailers are said to still remain in here in a spectral form to this very day. Welcome to the Cage. Britain in the 16th century was quite an unstable place for many rural communities. By 1534, King Henry VIII had formed the Church of England and essentially outlawed Catholicism, making it treason and punishable by death to anyone who remained a Catholic. This created a huge amount of turmoil and tension in communities throughout England, and some believe this was a huge part in setting the stage for the witch trials that occurred in Britain throughout the 16th and 17th century. Along with religious tensions, there was a growing divide in attitudes towards classes and even sexes, with the poor, disabled and women often being the focus of much negative attention. All of this, combined with people's superstitions at the time, created a breeding ground for fear, anger and superstition around the country. St Osyth was like many villages at the time and was one of the earlier examples of these brutal witch trials. Ursula Kemp was born in St Osyth in 1525 and was a cunning woman and a midwife who was often called upon by villagers to heal sickness and ailments. She lived this rather humble existence up until 1582, when her life, as well as the village she lived in, changed forever. A lady named Grace Thurlow, who was a neighbour of Ursula, asked for her services to help cure her son Davy of an illness. Davy recovered temporarily and Grace believed Ursula had indeed cured him. Sometime later, Grace herself asked for help as she had become lame, and Ursula agreed to help her at a cost of 12 pence. Grace's lameness went away, however she refused to pay Ursula for the services, and it was then that things went horribly wrong. The two had a huge row and Ursula vowed to get her own back at Grace. It was in the following weeks that Grace's son fell ill once again, her lameness returned and tragically her infant daughter fell from her cot, breaking her neck. Grace believed that the recent events were the result of Ursula placing a curse or a hex on her, and she later filed a complaint at the local magistrates, sparking an investigation and a witch hunt in the village. During the trial, many villagers testified against Ursula. She was accused of offences such as causing death by sorcery and preventing beer from brewing. It's also alleged that she herself confessed to these crimes and named a further 12 women also of witchcraft. In total, 14 women were held in the cage, awaiting their trial and ultimately their fate. In 1582, 14 women would have been kept in this very small room, which is the prison itself. Although no official documents survive as to what the conditions were actually like, looking at other prisons at the time, it's safe to say it would have been pretty grim. The prisoners would have had very little food, just enough water to keep them alive, and it's possible that there was abuse from the jailers. In total, 6 of the 14 accused witches were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging in Colchester in the spring of 1582. This was the end of the St Osyth witch hunt, but sadly very similar stories are told across the rest of Britain over the next few centuries, with so many lives being consumed by fear and superstition and sending countless others to the gallows. I suppose a lot of you are wondering how these witch trials could have possibly taken place. Friend turning on friend, neighbour turning on neighbour, and in some cases family member turning on family member, accusing each other of witchcraft and ultimately deciding their fate, usually being hanged. You've got to remember this was a long time ago. People's mentality was completely different and it was a very different world. Back then, the idea of witchcraft and the idea of curses was a very, very real thing. You add that to the concoction of economic instability, you add that to social changes at the time, and you add that to, especially in England, the reformation of the church with Catholicism being outlawed. It was a mixing pot for disaster, really. I think as well, even today, people like someone to blame for things. They don't like just saying something was unfortunate. They like a physical person to accuse and a physical person to blame and punish for certain events. And I don't think our mentality has changed a huge amount since the 16th and 17th century. Back then, if beer wasn't brewing, if there were floods or droughts, they wanted someone to blame for that, and people such as wise women and the poorer members of community, and women unfortunately as well, were targets for these accusations. The cage was used as a prison up until 1908, with many people from all walks of life spending time within the ancient walls. What I'm standing in now is locally known as Coffin Alley, and it's alleged that anyone that died